We acknowledge the Ancient Ones, the Greater Shamanic Council of Light, Hermes, both Trismegistus and Seshet, Lady of the Measuring Cord, as above, so below, as within, so without. We acknowledge Imhotep, architect of the cosmos.
May the earth
be the mirror of heaven. We acknowledge the sacred order of the Magi, and all throughout history who knew, like now, a turning of the ages. We acknowledge the master builders of Göbekli Tepe and the great shining ones at Kalash, the courage and knowledge of the Polynesian wayfinders traversing the great oceans. We acknowledge the prophetic traditions of Ezekiel and Daniel, the traditions of Avalon, the Merlin, and the Round Table, the calendric wizardry of the Maya, and the Venus teachings from Mesoamerica, the Jupiter teachings originating in China, and the Vedic lunar mansion traditions, the Babylonian and Sumerian sidereal zodiacs, the brilliant Hellenistic invention of the seasonal zodiac. The Neolithic peoples around the planet, some still today, honoring the sacred connection between the land and the sky. The Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, who created a time of 2,000 years of peace, the builders of Newgrange. My teachers that are not in human form, Mount Shasta, the Grandfather Rock at the Wonderland of Rocks in Joshua Tree, Mount Haleakala on Maui, the Fish Lake Valley, Hierophany, and the sacred landscapes around the planet, the astrosophy of Rudolf Steiner, and the esoteric astrology of DK in the Tibetan, both presaging the shamanic astrology paradigm, and particularly the archetypal visions of C.G. Jung and the cosmology of my mentor, Dane Rijar. For these and more, we give thanks.
Hi, everybody. This is Daniel Jamario on our full moon monthly vlogcast. And I'm here again today with Mary Kern, the president of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. And after having looked at other issues for a while, we're now going to go back into our exploration of the different mystery schools. We've already done 7 of them, and up on the docket today is Virgo and Pisces. And those two have a lot in common, as we're going to see, but they also have very significant differences. Just to go back to the starting point for a moment, this is within that framework that had been discussed maybe a good 6-7 months ago, which is that we are like taking on in some ways the role here at the turning of the ages of the Merlin or other individuals of knowledge that exist at a turning of the ages, a great turning of the ages. And individuals like that, or like what our school represents, is that we are honoring what was really great from previous times, at the same time being able to call out doesn't work anymore. We have to be absolutely aware of what's happening right now. And then we also are in the process here as a school and as individuals in the school of intending and dreaming the forward flow of the mystery school. What could it be like as we go into a new time? So that's 3 sides to it. You know, it's kind of like what are their reputations now, how they had been seen before, and then what can we make how can we help co-create moving them into a form in a way that is more useful to global humanity. This is that conversation we've had before about the difference between content and essence. So in other words, each of the mystery schools, that is to say the signs, we call the signs, the mystery schools, have an essence. They have an eternal essence. But at various points in history, whatever culture happens to be running the show, consensus reality and so on, will inject into the archetype what they believe the proper content of it would be. So this will also be part of the discussion that we are going to be having as we're doing this deep dive into these two mystery schools. So we will provide links here to the previous vlogcasts that we went into 7 others. And then also the Merlin philosophical exposition of why we're doing this today here at the Turning of the Ages. It would have been absolutely ideal here at the Libra full moon time that if we were discussing Libra and Aries. However, it turns out we already did those, right? So here we have Virgo Pisces, but somewhat appropriately, we're having this conversation just as the moon is about to go into Virgo. It's in the last part of Leo right now. And when most of you will read this, it will be a nearly full moon in Virgo. So I think that gives us good reason to begin with Virgo. Now, one other key concept to keep in mind, and this would apply to any time we look at the mystery schools, not your sun sign, please understand, but you know, the whole overall thing of what Virgo, the mystery school is, and what Pisces, the mystery school is that in regular astrology talk, this is called an opposition. And you know, a lot of times the word opposition in our language is they're against each other, okay? But in our view, in this approach, they're a resonant polarity. They actually have more in common than what they're opposed, as it were, okay? So the resonant polarity is the dominant factor, and yet at the same time, there's some very significant differences, and we'll dive into all of this. So I think a really good starting point is to just quickly refresh the understanding we have in the school. The 12 mystery schools are divided into 3 categories. 4 of them are so-called householder or culture bearer signs. These are the ones that most astrologers know as the cardinal signs. The second category is what we call self-interest or self-exploration. And these are the ones that are generally called fixed signs. We're now looking at 2 of the ones in the category of in service to spirit. When we try to explain what these categories refer to, the first 2 are a lot easier to discuss. The householder ones would be, you know, how does family operate? How do we structure a culture? How does long-term relationship happen over time? And then Aries, you know, how do you guard its, how do you protect it? You know, how do you to keep it intact over a long period of time? Those are understandable. Those are clearly in, you know, the category I think is well known. It's kind of the way the world works. Then the other 4, the 4 associated with self-interest, also, you know, Leo, Scorpio, Taurus, Aquarius are investigating the elements for their own sake. It's a self-exploration, each in their own way. We've discussed a number of those already. But what about in service to spirit? The only one of these we've looked at so far was Gemini. And that may well be the one that's least easily seen as being in service to spirit. What do we mean by in service to spirit? It actually means our life path is not determined by our responsibilities to a family or a culture or what the dictates of the culture would be. It's not so much about people. It's also not the development of the personal self. Now, the self-interest ones, of course, are about the development of the self in one of 4 different ways. These, however, and it's like in service to spirit, what do we mean by spirit? Actually, some of my shamanic teachers said that spirit simply means that which is not human. So it basically goes to kind of the old animist approach. everything in the world is alive. And so we're getting connection to spirit, and that is what dictates our behaviors. And each of these four, is informing of us how to do that and what our role is in those mystery schools. I would say that the two of the four, again, the ones that we're talking about in service to spirit, are Gemini and Sagittarius and Virgo and Pisces. Certainly Virgo and Pisces are the ones that are most easily seen as being in service to spirit. They're both giver signs, and they both are not, in our usual way of understanding it, personal. They're impersonal or transpersonal, as we'll see. And as givers, they're connecting into other things that are not the kinds of things that the self-interest or the householder ones tune into. So that just gives you a little bit of a flavor of what we mean in service to spirit. So that's what directs. So Virgo is not getting what it gets from a person. They're getting it directly, actually, as we'll see, from Gaia. A certain expression of the one reality, which is the sensation function, which is Earth. Pisces is getting it a different way, but we'll start off by going into Virgo. Just a full disclosure, I have Venus in Virgo, and Virgo has been a major part of my own life exploration, particularly through the feminine. And just a quick bit of history, and then I think I want to get Mary's input on this. As I was learning astrology back in the 70s and involved with the astrological communities at that point, there would be like a popular judgment made for or against certain signs. Like, so basically, Aquarius was thought of as being really great, but always the denigration happened toward Virgo. In fact, there were people who were ashamed to say, oh yes, I'm Venus in Virgo, or I'm Virgo, or I'm Virgo Moon. So it's a lot of judgments against it. And if you look at some of the basic astrology texts, they actually give descriptions of Virgo that don't sound very interesting. I actually spent a long period of time trying to deflect that, or to retranslate that to give a different view about what Virgo is. In your own experience of coming into the astrology world, Mary, what was your take on Virgo? What did you hear about Virgo?
Thank you.
Just as far as what average people would say about it.
Okay. First of all, my name is Mary Kern, if you haven't met me, and I am the president of the.
Oh my goodness! Oh gosh, I thought I was supposed to start out by introducing our phenomenal president, but again, you've been on these other mystery school ones in the past, so here we are again. Bad on me. Sorry, Mary.
No, that's okay. But just so you know, that I have been involved in the school for a number of years and have studied the material carefully and closely with Daniel and Kaylin. I have a Virgo moon, so growing up, it was really the sun sign that I was introduced to. And I guess the way it was related to me was, some of it was the shadow side, that you could be a little bit cold, aloof, picky, but also really focused on detail, which I always was, and I got a lot of good strokes for that. I would say it wasn't taught as much about the role of Virgo as this connection to everything, the cycles. I didn't go into it that deeply because I didn't really get interested in astrology until I met Daniel and Kaylin, and then I kind of shook my boat, and I took a deep dive into it. So it was more superficial, I think, what I knew about Virgo. I don't think I knew anything extra.
Well, but you're making my point here, because basically those usual statements about the sign Virgo, which we call mystery school, would be the sun sign descriptions, and I've made this comment in the past, that most of the sun sign descriptions are in fact the description of its shadow, or what the culture we're in believes is good or bad, right? Right or wrong. And what the project of the school is to actually provide a much larger spectrum of the possibilities of the human journey, male and female, without judgment, that all of them are useful on the wheel of life. And yes, of course, I ran into all of that. I mean, particularly women who were, just so ashamed because they were just under the thumb of these judgments, picky, critical, cold, hard to please, things like that. And I'd like at this moment to immediately replace all of those words with the word discriminating. But in order to fully get why Virgo ended up being in the position it was in mainstream astrology, we have to go back into the past. And you see, in the astrological mandala of life, there are two mystery schools most associated with all the concepts we have about mother, Cancer and Virgo. But Cancer is more the householder one, personal providing of nourishment. Virgo, however, as an impersonal mystery school, is its connection to Gaia herself, Earth Mother herself. In fact, we could actually substitute the word Gaia for Virgo. And there are many, many different images of the goddess that do show up in the Virgo mystery school, including Vesta and to a certain extent Ceres. And you can, and many of the stars of the constellation of the Virgo, of the priestess, the stars of what the astronomers call Virgo, the constellation, are also stars associated with women's mysteries. So Virgo in the old days was the primary constellation that was associated with women's mysteries, including Spica and all the main stars of that constellation. But a point I need to interject here is when we talk today about the sign of Virgo, and we'll see Pisces, this is not to be confused with the constellations. There is a spillover. I mean, there is a connection there. But when we talk about the age of Pisces, that does not necessarily mean the sign Pisces. Okay, it's the constellation. And during the age of Pisces and its opposite area of Virgo, I mean, they work together for the age of Virgo. Many will say it's the age of Pisces Virgo that we're coming out of now. That's the constellations. And some of the stuff of those constellations goes into the signs. But there's things about the sign or the mystery school that's quite a bit different. So remember now, the Merlin approach is to go back to what it was before and to capture what was great about it. So the next thing I want to bring up here is that almost entirely the Virgo mystery school was a renunciate mystery school. I'm using a word that is a little bit archaic today. Not too many people use that word. But in many parts of the ancient world, you were a householder or you were a renunciate. So the Virgo priestesses, for example, would choose not to marry. They might have a kid every so often in sacred ceremony, but they were not household or family. And their dedication and commitment was toward the sacred work. And I would basically say here that for both Virgo and Pisces, they have this element. Their dedication and commitment in service to spirit to the sacred work. And we use that expression sacred work as kind of a euphemism for your calling. And that's not to be thought of exactly as a career, although it can be your career. It's really great if your calling can be your career in these times. But in the old days, this was the priestess or priest expression. Man or woman who was completely dedicated in service to spirit through a sacred work. Now, when we use priestess, for example, and we're looking into the past now, That does not just mean the archetypal image that first comes up, a woman in the temple doing the ceremonies. It could be the same approach and dedication and commitment in whatever, for the most part, Gaia mysteries. That can be herbs, it can be midwifery, it can be women, all things associated with women's mysteries. It can be the kind of the energetic patterning of the body. And then in more recent times, it would be like the patterning of the psyche or the soul, archetypal psychology, and so on. So this brings up one of the key elements of the Virgo gift. The ability to discriminate in the sense of perceiving the web of life, perceiving the pattern. Like in one of the renditions of the original Emerald tablets, it would say that in the consideration of the one thing is its pattern with a capital P. So Virgo is about pattern recognition. And the so-called pickiness or critical nature of it is not to be confused with Saturn. Basically, Virgo cannot help but to align everything with the pattern that one perceives and senses into. Cannot help to do that. Now, often, because it's a renunciate position, they're not always that caring about or aware of what the average mainstream secular humanity is experiencing. Kind of they're off in their own world. They're so much dedicated to that in service to the patterning of life. And so this is a very important thing. I'm actually in the in the Shamanic Astrology handbook, we illustrate every one of the mystery schools with a quote. The one we have in there for Virgo is, from star to tree to insect, each fragment of creation is part of one design, the pattern of being that extends unbroken from the other world to this world. The pattern is constantly in motion, connecting us in life and death to the source of all being. And that's from Morgan Llewellyn in a book called Druids, which gives the flavor of this beautifully. Another way we try to illustrate this, bringing the past into the present, is with the cards, the divination card deck. And if you want to get a sense of this, if you have a card deck, you can actually be taking a look at this as we are discussing Virgo here. And I pulled out 3 cards. They're all the deck has 3 Virgo cards: the god, the goddess, and the mystery school. And as you'll notice here on these cards, 2 of them have the web, the Spider Woman. and you can see the priest card is like this. This person is just really dedicated, committed in service. What it says on the cards: sacred service aligned with Earth Mother. It says the high priestess dedicated to her sacred work. It says the sacred work, servant of the goddess. And that would be the God version of it. So basically the masculine expression of Virgo is in service to Gaia. And should they be in relationship, then they're in service to the purpose of the relationship, which is basically to assist the partner in fulfilling their sacred work. And of course, at this time period, it would be something that would be mutual. They're assisting each other, which is why we call this the relationship path called the helpmate. The 2 that are together, not in order to raise a family per se, although they can do that too. But also they're together to assist each other, like priest and priestess together, to do their, quote, sacred work. And that does not necessarily mean something spiritual or religious. I mean, it could be a person who is absolutely committed to be the best musician on the planet, They're perceiving the patterning of music, and so they're a singer-songwriter, let's say, and then the partner is is the drummer or the manager, or the co-composer. They're working together. So there's this we call it impersonal, because the magic of Virgo is not from a human. It's from direct connection to the patterning of life. So we're actually bringing in many of the features that was known about Virgo from the past. Now this then brings us to why there are all of these, an additional feature about why there's negative things said about Virgo, because it's impersonal. It's not used to, and this will be particularly true for Virgo moons, or sometimes if you are a latecomer to knowing what your Venus or Mars in Virgo is about, you're not really used to how ordinary humans do personal relationship. And so it's quite a training or a teaching, should your Dharma be to do that. Because today, at this time in history, there aren't very many true renunciates. So one of the ways that we're redreaming Virgo is that it can be its own essence, but it also can include personal relationship. But in a way that's not like a mainstream version. And then we certainly want to eliminate these judgments that come from the patriarchy against the sacredness of the intent of Virgo to be in service to Gaia herself. Now, it's interesting, right? When a lot of times it would say, oh, because it's an earth sign, therefore it's just about those mysteries, okay? But in fact, the patterning of the sky, as we see it from Earth, is also her patterning, the web of life. And just as in other ancient cultures, the patterning of the sky was perceived of through the image of a goddess, not a god, not creator per se, not in that aspect, but it's the patterning, the sacred web that we see in the starry patterns, and the rhythms and cycles of the seasons of Gaia are also connected to this. And over the years, Kaylin and I always riffed about this to say, we think that in the old days, the ones that were mainly tracking the seasons and knew the stars were women. That it was part of women's sacred mysteries until it was hijacked by the patriarchy. Thoughts?
Well, what direction are we going with it? I mean, the thoughts I've been no, I don't have any thoughts about it at this point. I mean, I think.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I'm just, if you can collaborate and give your feedback on this at any point. I'll stop at various points and we'll do that. Another basic factor that we did not mention at the beginning, which would apply to both the Virgo and Pisces, is they both are in the category of archetypally feminine. So they both are involution mystery schools, spirit into matter, in two different ways. And when we had our discussion here about Virgo, it's the earth version of involution. And some of the significant differences between Virgo and Pisces is the fact that Pisces is the involutionary journey of the archetypal feminine that goes into water, that goes into the feeling function. Another interesting distinction between the two of them is that Virgo is, quote, left brain, all right? And it's a archetypally feminine left brain. So over the years, sometimes I've always liked to say that Virgo is the left brain of the goddess, the analytical side of the goddess, while Pisces is right brain. It's associated with our feelings. And when we look at the water sign or the feeling function signs, two of them, Cancer and Pisces, are primarily start with being able to sense into and feel into the others' feelings. It's only Scorpio, which we've looked at before, which is concentrating fully on our own. You know, this is my passion. This is my desire. These are my feelings. So we've looked a little bit at the reason why there's a shadow projected onto Virgo. You know, it could reframe it from discrimination towards discrimination rather than picky, critical, and so on. There's a story I always like to tell where there's and this is really not about men and women here, but I'll just tell it within this framework. So there's a Virgo type wife, let's say, and the husband is in the bathroom, and the wife is saying, "That's the 9th time in a row that you did not squeeze the toothpaste up to the top." And the guy is like, "Stop attacking me," right? No, she's not attacking. She's just noticing. And she might not have been aware that it did hurt his feelings, you see. So it's just you can't help but notice when things are out of pattern. And there's a right way to do things, as it were, which is based upon what is dictated by the pattern. The Virgo is not creating the pattern. They're adjusting to it. They cannot help but do that, you see. So, and that's why there's that famous statement about Virgo. Virgo cannot see the forest for the trees. They're just focused in on those, you know, it's the details, yes, but it's the details of the pattern, the actual pattern. So fortunately, we do have Virgo to keep track of that, but it need not be renunciated at this point. Another factor which has always been true about Virgo, and I think this would be true as we dream it into the future, more so than any other mystery school, with the possible exception, maybe Aquarius would be its equal, is the need for space, sacred space. One's own temple, one's own altar room, one's own little place in the forest, one's own connection to rock formations, one's own connection to a large tree or to the ocean or the shore. People will have different resonations as far as what for them is where they can go in. So another factor I want to bring up here is that the connection with Vesta or Hestia. One of my favorite archetypal psychologists, James Hillman, puts Vesta or Hestia, he was using the Greek word for it, is the main, you could say the god or goddess associated with therapy. And so therefore his view was Hestia is the creation of sacred space to go in. And so that all words that begin with I-N are associated with the Virgo Mystery School. And if you are a giver, if you have a profession that is in service to others, then your priority is to assist the other person to go in sacred space. And so that a lot of people I know, men and women with strong Virgo actually are fabulous as astrologers or as archetypal psychologists. But then there's the other factor, which you probably, Mary, have met a lot of them, women with a strong Virgo element that heavily into women's mysteries. You know, these are the ones that maintain the connection to the Moon Lodge, to the cycles for women, midwifery, issues associated with that, and as well as the herbology and everything else. So women's mysteries is a great deal to do with it. And then men who have it are in service to that. You know, they're also connected to the Gaia in service to spirit through the sacred feminine.
It's been beautiful to see some of that starting to come back in the culture, because quite frankly, from the time I was very young, it was pretty much all lost in terms of sacredness and awareness and
Mhm.
um, any type of honoring. So yes, I mean, that's the part of the turning of the age that's beautiful for Virgo, is that women are getting deeply involved in that, particularly younger women, and the way that they're bringing up their own daughters. So yes, definitely.
Yeah, great. Yeah, just as in an earlier part of my life, you probably know there was one time in my life where I had a corporate job. I was a systems analyst in 3 different companies from 1978 to 1984. And it's interesting because the women who were most successful, that I worked on management reporting, and I saw the salaries, and often these women had higher salaries than me, and at the same grade, or rather, at the same level of experience and so on. And so often they had lots of Virgo, and they were really, really good in the cubicle. They were really good on the computer. They were really good in analysis and left brain kind of stuff. But since I had the opportunity to do readings for most of them, one of the reasons that got me fired um, was that they were not very happy. That their personal lives and their physical health was very compromised, and it was very clear why. They were not connecting to nature. They weren't connected to the natural world. They were lost in their left brain, and frequently the Virgo types can easily be exploited by a technological society. If you really enjoy that, that's fine. I'm not saying not to do it, but to balance it with a connection to Gaia herself, and to have that ability, not just to be alone, but to be in a sacred space that has some connection to ceremonial reverence for the patterning of life. Um, that's just something I've noticed, and it's still going on now, actually, because we don't really honor at this time in history, as part of Kali Yuga, we're not honoring now many of the sacred professions, um, which was usually run by a guild system, or apprenticeship. The young Virgo type male, with his he would say, I want to learn herbology. I want to learn acupuncture. I want to learn um, energy healing. I want to learn even blacksmiths. We're connected to an ancient sacred tradition, and you didn't really have to have a business plan. You didn't have to try to figure out cleverly how you're going to make money in a system, in a time period that it's all just about materialism. So it's very important to be honoring these places on the wheel as we move forward. For me, Mary, the main, as far as dreaming Virgo forward, obviously it includes that essential connection to Gaia herself, the patterning of the one reality in her physical form through our beautiful planet Earth and the starry patterns. But it's also to restart the recognition of sacred professions in service to spirit. And then also to recognize, as we go forward, the split between renunciate and householder. While we can choose a renunciate path, but there's no reason to make it so that those with a lot of Virgo cannot be sexual parents, involved in the world also, but to sacrifice, in the negative sense of that word, that connection to the sacred web of life. Yeah.
I think there's a challenge with the emergence of the artificial intelligence and um, even a less connection with the natural cycles. In my own lifetime, again, I look at what people in India, they honor the sun when it rises, they stop the Muslim, they honor the sun when it sets. They they set their daily lives within the framework of the sun. Um, we we've lost that. We eat into the wee hours of the night. The Vespers that were even considered part of the Christian faith have kind of fallen to the wayside. These were all
Right.
ways of honoring the different parts of the daytime. Those were um, those were still points.
Right.
Those were
Right.
times when you could do and should connect in. And then the emergence of the cross quarters, which was
Mhm.
something I had no awareness of before shamanic
Mhm.
astrology came into my life. And so many of the holidays and the festivals that have been overlaid by commercial holidays or Christian holidays.
Banking holidays.
Yes, yes. And even
Market days. Yes.
even the Gregorian calendar was a way of diminishing our connection in. So yeah, the shamanic astrology has really done a lot to bring awareness back. In fact, probably a lot of different astrologies have, because
Mhm.
these seasonal remembrances are ancient ways of seeing the changes of the year as goddesses, and having, again, when life loses its sacredness, it loses its meaning. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
not just for Virgo, with a suicide rate so high that in Japan more people are dying from suicide than from the COVID virus.
Well, if you're locked up inside and can't even go out to your garden or to
Right.
your forest grove or your mountaintop easily, then that's really a problem. And then there's the issue of Gaia herself. She cannot be very happy about the way in which post, like the fourth industrial revolution is desecrating the planet. The amount of plastic, yeah, I mean, we could go on and on about that, but at its core, Virgo's job really is reverence of her and honoring in an animistic way our sacred connection to her, that we are part of the web of life. We do not have dominion over her. So that is the commitment of Virgo, both male and female. And just a quick thing for those that are watching this, again, this is not about whether your sun sign is Virgo. In fact, some of this material I'm sharing is much more pertinent to men with Mars in Virgo or Moon in Virgo, women with Venus in Virgo, Moon in Virgo, particularly Virgo rising. Because if you got Virgo rising, that's what you're moving toward. And before we begin looking at Pisces, let's mention here that if you do have strong Virgo, the power and the strength of your incarnation comes from your connection to her. It's not from a physical, it's not from a human teacher. It is from the essence of, we could say, the goddess Gaia herself, and the creation that we are fortunate to be part of. So hopefully this gives you a bit of an additional flavor to Virgo as we move into a new time. And we have to be honest about what the shadow of this has been, and then also to be quite grateful for what the contributions that the Virgo of the past has made to our current times, particularly in the pre-patriarchal time period. All right, so that's all
Right.
happening.
And I think you did mention that that was the priestess and the priest and the druids, and those were the wisdom keepers, and their rituals and their ceremonies and their ability to make space for the sacred
Mhm.
was um, was a major role in the culture and keeping the culture together. So
Yeah, and then just as the further back in time you go, particularly in hunter-gatherer cultures and Aboriginal cultures, ceremony and ritual were integral to the rites of passage and things like that, which are also part of this ancient teaching that we now need to reimagine in new ways.
And Daniel, wouldn't you agree that so many of these sacred sites that you've spent your life visiting and writing about and taking the rest of us to, that is all very directly Virgo, because those places were created at great human expense and over great spans of time in order
Mhm.
to really solidify that honoring and to make it
Yeah,
a
as
huge
above, so
part of it.
below.
Yeah,
To,
but it's such
to
a big
connect,
part. Yeah. I was just, it was a huge piece of humanity's life. And it
yeah.
such a small role today. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So clearly, there's so much more to this, and much more of it is covered in the books and also in the courses. You know, so there's this a lot more about this is in the script and archetype online course, and previous YouTubes and discussions that have happened over a longer period of time. Um, the purpose here today really is to give this larger framework on how to approach the mystery schools here at the Great Turning of the Ages. So let's turn our attention to Pisces, a water sign, a feeling function.
Right.
Um, Now, over the last number of years, uh, most everybody out, what I've noticed is that most everybody out there, of course, can easily tune in to what is generally talked about Pisces, about empathy and sensitivity. It's also a giver, about historically, Pisces is a healer, a transpersonal healer. They have the capacity to feel into where grief, sorrow, and suffering on the planet is. And then they care. I mean, there's a caring, a commitment, a commitment to be of help, to be of service. And actually, the word service can be used for both Virgo and Pisces. Um, when we do a more extended view of the chart, including the 144 storylines, should a person have the Pisces job in any tribe, they were the healer of the tribe. You know, so that imagery of a sort of a self-abnegated giver to help and heal indiscriminately. Um, Most people have the sense that belongs to Pisces. But there's another element that I've noticed more and more over the years that equally important to Pisces, the mystery school of Pisces, is a hunger for ecstatic experience, for, I guess we could say, altered states. Now that's a fairly major, that's a large spectrum. I mean, it can be the rapturous experience of Diksha, being embraced by the love of the one reality, you know, where you feel held by universal love. Your heart and being is filled with that feeling of connection, like a God consciousness. Who would not want that experience? Well, Pisces is a particular lover of that experience. But then also, as you would look at the basic sun sign descriptions of Pisces, there's a lot. It can go into, well, yeah, the alcoholics, you know, a drug experience, sexual. There's this, but it comes from a natural hunger to have the experience which is non-ordinary states, ecstatic experience. And that we can't ignore it, that part of it. It's even the kind of ecstatic state that can happen when you're actually helping someone heal. You know, when you can actually help almost like as a guide, when you go into a person's healing. But then this then brings up one of the shadows, and it's also a well-known shadow of the Pisces Mystery School. That is no boundaries and taking it on. Um, to go so deeply into where this grief, sorrow, suffering, emotional experience, feeling function experience of other people and the whole world ultimately, that you have no, if you don't have enough boundaries, you take it on. And then you end up actually feeling worse than the person who, it's like a feeling of responsibility to carry it, to hold it. kind of like, and this may be a controversial thing to say, I personally feel like it's the shadow of the latter days of Christianity, where an original Pisces image, Jesus, Jeshua, um, Isa, whatever name you want to use for him, who was a later version of Dionysus, who was connected to the sacred feminine, who was connected to living and dying and living and dying, and aliveness, passion, and so on, ends up becoming the crucified one who dies for everybody else's sins, and then that gets injected into part of the shadow of Pisces. I'll be a martyr, I'll be a victim. It's my responsibility to do that. So the shadow of Pisces is frequently believing that's your responsibility and then having no boundaries. So to be able to be a great healer, it's very important to be able to have your own boundaries, that another person's suffering is not yours, or it's not your responsibility to take it on. And yet at the same time, it is the Piscean type who's most likely to not be able to detach from the felt suffering, whether it's the plants or the animals or other human beings. It's like you feel it, and that's why it's considered to be connected to things like the bodhisattvas, or figures like bodhisattva, by the way, means a realized individual who decides to stick around or come back to help. Their life and dedication is to be here to help.
And that would be mostly the Pisces moon, wouldn't it, Daniel?
Pisces moon would kind of mean that that person had been playing that role for a long period of time. But if they've come back now with a Pisces moon, usually what that means is they're here to do something different. You've kind of already accomplished that. Maybe now you have a personal life. Maybe now you get to have a marriage. Maybe now you get to have sex or something like that, right? So it's something different. But if you go ahead, sorry.
You've also said that Pisces has in their DNA the mythology of the year king, which is even earlier time period, correct? But same archetype, sacrifice for the whole.
Yeah. Okay, let me run through that, because it also would apply to Virgo to a certain extent. Is that if we look at the way that sex and relationship would have happened previously, prior to patriarchy, let's say, that in a helpmate relationship, the dominant teacher was the woman, the priestess, what Robert Graves calls the head nymph. That was the expression he used back in the 40s or 50s, right? Dominant woman. And the men would compete to be the chosen one. And they knew what the ceremonies were about, and they would be the one who won the competitions would be chosen to be the king or the consort. And then following a season with her, it could be in some cases just 9 months, other cases 4 years, 8 years, and then the king must die. And then the king would be the year king. That was just it could be the 8-year king, it could be the 4-year king, but the year king would be essentially sacrificed and ground into the soil for the spring planting, as a sacrifice to the earth and to the sacred feminine. Of course, in patriarchy, this turned around and it becomes the ritual sacrifice of the virgins. That was the I guess, like patriarchy trying to invert the whole thing. At this time in history, neither one of those. It's a priest and priestess together, helpmates to each other. But what you do bring up here is, and I've seen it with a lot of men with a strong Pisces element, there still remains in the DNA of the Pisces DNA of the memory of that. the memory of, in fact, some say that the revolt against the matriarchy became, I don't want to be your king. I'm not going to die. In fact, I'm going to take over, which is what happened around the time of the journey of Inanna into the underworld. We could go on and on about, what was happening in the past and how we got to this point. Actually, maybe one of the survival strategies of the Virgo and sometimes Pisces was to become transpersonal, impersonal. It's better not to have sex. It's better not to, be owned by a man in a household or relationship. So they remain separate and renunciate in that sense. Okay, so, but we're moving into a new time. So priest and priestess can be in harmony with each other, and both committed to being in service to the sacred and the connections to Gaia, and both the transpersonal and impersonal, where Gaia is the earth, our earth mother. Pisces is that feminine, archetypally feminine connection to the Ananda, the love of the one reality, where you feel held, connected. Universal connection to the love that comes from the heart of the universe. Not the easiest thing in Kali Yuga to connect with, but boy, when you do connect with it at this time, it's a heck of a lot more powerful than a time period in history where everybody's connected. So it's those of us that are putting our attention on how to reconnect to that. That's really important work here at this time. And I also want to mention here that hunger for the ecstatic experience, we need to really have compassion for those who maybe make the mistakes, the honest mistakes of looking for those ecstatic connections in ways that are ultimately hurtful or dangerous or counterproductive. This is maybe another way we can see Virgo and Pisces together. If we reinstituted the sacredness and ceremony of the hunger for ecstatic states and turned it into something not judged, that would go a long way toward eliminating the problems of addiction. And it's actually the therapist, Sylvia Pereira, in her book, Celtic Queen Maeve. Her whole book is about this issue, about the reason for addiction is because our loss of sacred ceremony to connect with ecstatic states, including our understanding that sexuality between awake human beings is not just for procreation. It's in order to connect with higher self, with the Ananda and the bliss of what it is to be human, So that, unfortunately, that seems to be being turning us into silicon cyber AI beings is a degradation of both Virgo and Pisces as involution signs, honoring the aliveness of the earth and the love that comes from that one female force. Mary, I'm always, I remember this, is that when I was over in South Africa, there was a shamanic person who worked with our group, and in every ceremony, and I think this relates to both Virgo and Pisces, in every ceremony he would say, we have gratitude to that one woman. Which was a beautiful way of perceiving both the personal and the impersonal and the transpersonal version of it. The whole universe, that one woman, right? And that goes back to the roots of the virtually every metaphysical system that was not hijacked by patriarchy. So, I'm a couple other things I was thinking about as I was tuning in before our conversation today.
Right.
And it kind of links Virgo and Pisces. It has to do with service here. In Hermann Hesse's book, Siddhartha. Near the end of the book, where Prince Siddhartha gains enlightenment, in the rendition by Hermann Hesse, he's struggled so much to kind of get that final transmission, you know, how to be enlightened, how to be utterly free. And how it happened is that one day he's being taken across the river by a riverboatman. And the riverboatman was so present, so much in service to what he was doing as the riverboatman, in service to the people that he was taking across the river, it all dropped away. That was when he got it. That you don't have to have some, you know, really important job. You know, you don't really have to heal 100,000 people. You know, it's just whatever you're doing. If you love what you do, and you're in the present moment with it in a place of service, that's it. You know, so that is so the riverboatman is every bit as a sacred career, as, you know, in service to spirit, sacred work as you know, a heart surgeon or a or the great ceremonialist who's making the rain. You know, so it's that simple, actually.
And what an opportunity to be connected to the river and to Gaia, is to be a riverboatman. Yeah, that's very cool.
I'm also wanting to share, before we complete our sharing about these mysteries today, the quote, which speaks to both the brilliance of Pisces, but also its rather subtle connection to its shadow. Oh, and I forgot to show that also that we have also 3 cards that we can access in the card deck for Pisces: the God, the Goddess, and the Mystery School. And the empathic union with God and humanity, healing and compassion for all. The Goddess of compassion, transcendent love. And then we have that one of the kind of the male version, you know, the God version of it, you know. The empath, the bodhisattva, mystical vision, the rapture of transcendental vision, the bringer of ecstasy, so on. But the quote we have, and I believe this is the ultimate Pisces quote, it's from Rumi. It's one of the lesser known Rumi statements. Rumi says, "I saw grief drinking a cup of sorrow, and I called out, 'It tastes sweet, does it not?' Grief answers, 'You've caught me, and you've ruined my enterprise. How can I sell sorrow when they know it's a blessing?'" And this actually speaks to both the deepest essence of Pisces. The deepest, it's like grief is actually as much an essential quality of the human as joy. To be able to have grief, you have to have had love, you know, and out of grief can come some of the greatest expressions of creativity and art, if you really do surrender to authentic grief, not fake grief. But if that real grief is there, it means you really loved. At the same time, it can be a gig, you know, like how can I sell it if they know it's if it's a blessing, you know? So there's like those 2 different sides of it, which connects into how sometimes, as a shadow of any of these mystery schools, you can turn its shadow into a almost like a possession. I love being a victim. I am a victim. You know, then it ends up becoming an identification with the wound itself, you know, rather than the healing essence. That this would actually take us into, you know, Chiron stories too.
So Daniel, you're saying joy and grief are the same thing. And as much as that's the essence, it's actually at the turning of the age, the goal to reconnect with and to
No. I'm not saying they're the same thing at all. I'm saying that they are at the same level of essential qualities. So that if we make the list of the essential qualities that most people think about, compassion, joy, self-love, creativity, well, one of them is also grief.
But really the center point of that is being in oneness, because I see joy and grief as opposites. So the middle point, the middle way, to me, they are the same thing. They're just the extreme ends of a spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're like they're sort of different sides of the same coin.
Exactly. And that the Pisces Dharma is really also about developing ways to experience ecstatic states without addictions or the loss of the capacity to function in the world with that strong, healthy, egoic structure. I'm
Right.
also, in terms of the ecstatic piece of this, I'm always reminded that in French, the word for
Mhm.
climax means a petite death. And that death is the death of the ego. It's just letting completely go of the ego and
Yeah.
existing in the oneness. So it's not so much that's lost, because it's actually right in their language. I think there's a awareness of it, not so much in the American culture as it is in other cultures.
Oh, you're using the word, the lesser used word today, climax. We don't hear that too much anymore, but it's like orgasm. Like a full orgasm, male or female, the little death.
The petite. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
That's
but the
great.
death is of the ego.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And out of that comes
Transcend.
creativity,
Yeah.
aliveness. Yeah. The suppression of the female orgasm, by patriarchy is one of the main challenges that has resulted in the current crisis. Anyway, that's a whole other issue that goes into the sex and gender conversation. I'd like to just maybe add one more thing. And when I first heard this, it absolutely completely broke my heart, and I opened my heart. It's some of those older people listening might know this story, and I wish I could remember the name of the person who wrote this, but I think this is an incredible Pisces story. It's about this man who was in Japan, and he was taking black belt training, and he had just gotten his 12th level. He completed the training. He is like a master of martial arts. And he said, oh, wow, I'm just really feeling great. I completed it. He gets on a commuter train, and he's sitting in the commuter train in Japan. And a laborer had just gotten off work, and he's drunk. He's probably carrying sake or something, and he's looking for trouble. And he's just messing with people on this commuter train. And so this guy that has just completed his training, he's all right. I guess I'm ready to handle this. And so he engages with him. He kind of goes, like, I'm ready for you, big boy, right? And so at that very instant, this wizened little old man, probably 75 or so, Japanese man, just says, "Hey." And the laborer stops and says, "What?" He says, "Hey, do you like sake?" Yes, my wife and I liked her, but she died. Oh, why? I love sake too. And within a few seconds, it's like this laborer has his head on the lap of the little old man and stroking him, right? And so the guy who wrote this particular story, he said that was his initiation. not what he thought it would be, you know. And so that to me is that transpersonal compassion for all who are suffering, and knowing how to do that elegantly is really the gift of this mystery school, in my view. So I just, when I first read that, it's like just that brought so many tears, you know. And I guess I'm Neptune conjunct the sun, you know, so I have a Neptunian piece, you know. So um, any final thoughts you have, so we can keep this within like about an hour?
It's about an hour and 10 minutes, but that's fine.
As usual, right?
Yeah, it's been a good little um, review, and hopefully a few new things for people. Um, two more archetypes, well explained from the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School point of view. So,
In a new way, in a way, hopefully, that will inspire our imaginative qualities to dream this forward into the world we would all love to live in, which is
right,
part of our function now, you know, to co-create with great mystery.
these
And so
archetypes.
until the next time, thank you for doing this with me, Mary. I really
Yes,
appreciate your having someone to collaborate with and to riff with when I go through all these different explanations. So until next time, Mary. Okay,
yes,
thanks.
Daniel, I just want to thank you um, for teaching the equality of all of these archetypes. I think it makes a big difference in the world we live in. So thank you for that. And we'll
Okay.
see you soon. Bye bye.